Lancashire Police have drawn heavy criticism in an independent review of the force's handling of another tragic disappearance, Nicola Bulley. Nicola's body was found 2 weeks after she went missing, and it was around then the police revealed her struggles with alcoholism and the menopause, an action the review deemed completely unnecessary. Here's what the lead review of the case, CEO of the College of Policing, Andy Marsh, had to say.
I want to start by saying we found the police investigation and search to have been well conducted by Lancashire Constabulary. We spoke to many officers and police staff and volunteers who worked on this investigation, and their dedication and commitment was clear to see. They demonstrated the very best of policing.
I'm now joined by former Detective Chief Inspector Simon Harding. Simon, welcome to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. What are your thoughts on this review? I suspect that, like me, there's nothing particularly surprising here.
No, I don't think there's anything surprising. I think that some of the interesting parts that come out of this are that the family themselves did not take part in the review. They declined. It says due to personal reasons. We don't know why that is. They picked out quite a few points that they were obviously impressed with, that Lancashire Police dealt with in terms of the resourcing and the way that certain parts were dealt with. But they also picked on those points that we talked about back in February, which were really that they should have put cordons in place. It would have helped with a number of parts of the investigation, that they perhaps, even though they worked on this hypothesis, and there's a little bit of a cross here in the report where it talks about, you know, that the working hypothesis is correct, but they also then say that perhaps they should have considered perhaps not saying that because of the fact that they hadn't cleared all lines of a hypothesis, i.e. that she was taken by a third party. So there's bits, good bits and bad bits.
Yeah, I mean, the problem will be whether the police have actually learned from that terrible investigation that they ran, learned anything at all as to whether they should replace or move people around. Do you know whether or not any of that's happened ahead of the publication of this report?
Oh, I think in terms of the investigation, I think what you do see is that you know, there's going to be no misconduct issues or anything like that at all. You look at the learning, which they're talking about all police forces can learn from, but these are quite unusual circumstances. You know, the way in which she went missing, the public media frenzy around her going missing was unprecedented, really. And you know, you only saw that before in things like the Sarah Everard case, and you know, so realistically, I think it's very difficult to say that you'll see something like this again. But you know, this is a different kind of response. You know, the media response and the armchair detectives, as they call them, turning up at the scene, you know, treating it like a bit of a circus, you know, made it a really very unusual case for what they're saying is actually quite simplified missing persons inquiry.
It was a very odd time, wasn't it? Because I mean, I certainly hadn't seen anything like it, and I remember talking to you and listening to you on talkTV at the time, talking about, you know, the various methods of searching and how there was another character who seemed to have been involved in other searches. People wanted to talk about this case, and they wanted to make videos of themselves on the riverbank. I mean, I haven't seen anything like it since, really.
No, and I don't think, you know, I hope you don't see it again. I mean, I do think that one of the problems, and they have highlighted it in the review, that, you know, this is caused by the fact that certain decisions made at the beginning of that investigation even over the next few days, the early stages, weren't right. And it's pointed out that there should have been a cordon in place. Now, you know, irrespective of what you believe has happened and what your working hypothesis might be at the time, you know, you got to look at what else could happen inside your scene. So when you haven't ruled out when you haven't ruled out a third party involvement, you need to shut that scene up. And that is it's a huge scene, but it still needed to be done. And I think the mismanagement, unfortunately, of the crime scene itself, and of course, you know, they'll have a go at me for saying it's a crime scene, but it was a potential crime scene at the time before you knew everything that had happened. It should have been dealt with differently. It should have had a huge cordon to stop people coming in. And it gives you then the ability to investigate. It gives you the ability to deal with your searches, everything else that you need to do without that interference that unfortunately the interference and the media interference and the public interference completely overwhelmed the investigation.
I mean, is there a case for a kind of group boss of some kind when it comes to handling press and when it comes to handling the public, if you like, you know, because sometimes you get a force or a police constabulary that's simply not prepared for the focus of attention. You know, some of them may be, if it's Metropolitan Police, obviously very different from perhaps a smaller force. I mean, is there some case to be made for that, so that you could actually, if you were running a particular police organisation, you could call on those people to say, well, what do we do here?
Well, that is in place, believe it or not. I mean, we do have, you know, if I was an SIO for some of the cases in London that I dealt with, you know, if there was a particularly high media interest, the family do want to see that investigator out there because that's the person they relate to. But sometimes you have to bring in a talking head, so to speak, because there might be a wider point to make around reassurance for the public. You know, and quite often that's why you see senior officers who aren't necessarily directly involved in the investigation, and also you have what are called gold groups, and they are where you have meetings with the officer who's investigating, and then the local community independent advisory groups, they're called, who come in and talk about the location, talk about people within that community, so that your messaging is directly to those people and is right. And I think, you know, that one of the biggest criticisms there's been is the media response and how they dealt with the family, and how the family's media response and the police's media response and that independent search team that came in there, their separated media all became so muddled that it caused so many problems for the investigation.
Because even the dress and the clothes that were being worn by some of the police officers was criticised, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, the way that she was scrutinised around what she was wearing is wrong. You know, 100% wrong. You know, why are you focusing on that? It's ridiculous. You know, as far as I was concerned, she looked smart. She's a very well-respected person, but perhaps the advice she was getting and this particular case was unusual to her, as it would have been to a number of people. You know, I think that's you know, if you say colloquially, out of order, really, how she was treated in that, because it took away from what was really important, which was finding Nicola at the time. So, you know, yes, that they will look at everything and come up with a future strategies to help Lancashire and, you know, give advice to other police forces. But it was so unusual, and it was, you know, so huge for what you would say is like a provincial force, essentially, that you know, they just got completely overwhelmed.
Yeah. And so, do you think overall this report will be helpful?
Well, I mean, you know, it's 140 odd pages long. I think, you know, there's bits in it which will be, there's bits which officers with experience will say, well, we do that anyway. You know, so that's probably a local force problem and learning. You know, the way that certain SIOs, you know, senior officers who investigate homicides and things like high risk missing persons will look and say, well, I would do that anyway. So I'm not sure that all of it will be helpful, but whatever is helpful should be adopted, looked at in terms of being, you know, a metropolitan kind of problem in the big cities, or those that might face those kind of different investigations they've never faced before in the sort of outer provincial forces. And, you know, let's hope in future we see a slightly more professional start to an investigation that stops these problems coming in.
Absolutely right. Simon, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Simon Harding there, former senior police officer.